It is live.
It is live.
Hey.
What is up, everybody? I am Shay from the channel Zachary Shay, and I'm here with several marvelous booktubers. I guess going like right and down. So, Nikhil, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, I'm Nikhil with Shelf Esteem. I'm a composer and also a booktuber now, and so I'm a fellow reading addict, and I'm grateful to be here. Thanks for putting this together, Shay.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Oh.
Sam.
My turn. Yeah, so my name's Sam from the channel Samwise. I'm currently faceless today, but that's okay. Yeah, and I've been, I've known of Drowned Kingdom probably since when Philip covered it a while ago, and it's sounded interesting, but I haven't got around to reading it until now. So thanks, Zach. It was fun to get to read this, and also it'll be great to chat about it with some lovely people and friends here. So.
Oh yeah, it's awesome having you. And Preacher.
What's going on, everybody? Preacher reads. I am the least fantasy experienced in this group, for sure. So happy to be here, lending my novice opinions.
All right, I'm Philip Chase, and I'm just really happy to be here with you guys. This is a great reason for me to continue this series because I did read Drowned Kingdom more than 2 years ago, and I'm already the senior citizen of the group. So please understand that I might not be exactly, with all the details. Some of the names might be a little fuzzy for me, but I remember most of it. So, and I'm sure as you guys talk as well, it'll help trigger memories for me. But yeah, thank you for having me here, Shay, and it's awesome to be here with all you guys.
Hi, I'm David from Four Corners of the Page. I'm at an advantage because it's 1 a.m. over here. So if I say something particularly dumb, you can blame the fact that it's 1 a.m. over here rather than anything else. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to hold up my nice deluxe broken binding copy of A Drowned Kingdom, and I'm gonna enjoy this discussion with you guys.
Making us all jealous there.
Absolutely.
I guess it's me, last one. Jake, lovely to be here with all of you fine gentlemen. I think I heard of this similarly to what Sam said when Philip was talking about this before. I was like, man, that sounds like a really cool thing, and it's kind of been on the radar since then. And this was just a great excuse to finally do it and talk about it with some friends, and that'll be great. I do have a very important question, I think, to start us off here. Preacher, are you a follower of the one God, the single God, the God of love and light, or are you a pagan rule breaker?
Listen, we're gonna have to talk about a lot of this today. So
Fair enough.
I'm glad this guy's not in my congregation. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
You
mean he's not what you're looking for out of your typical part of your church?
Not quite. Just missing the mark. Just missing the mark.
See that Janny Wirtz is in the chat, which is super cool. So I like Sam and like Jake. I think the first I'd heard of it was also on Philip covering book one, and then it was actually Janny Wirtz who was like touted it as one of her favorite self-pub series. And then I just saw everybody like book hauling their broken bindings of it, and I'm like, there's a lot of people who are aware of this, who are getting the books, who just haven't read it. So that was the main reason for wanting to throw it together. But let's see here.
You gotta get it started right.
Right on, right on.
All right. Yeah.
Well, I think we could just start by going around and saying what we thought of the book, what themes stuck out to you, what you thought of the characters, what you thought of the structure of the book. Because there's kind of a lot going on with this. We have Plato's allegory of Atlantis, or Atlantics, but I also saw a lot of like Homer and Virgil inspirations. It feels very much inspired by the Greek epics in my mind, and I know in Philip's own review he compared it to the Aeneid by Virgil.
Yeah,
I would agree with. And so, yeah, I guess just starting with Nikhil, and then just like we did with our introductions, we can talk about what stood out to us, what we liked, maybe what we didn't like, and just get a discussion going.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, for me, and I'm very interested to hear everybody's responses, because I'm sure we'll be we'll have some similar and also very different thoughts on specific scenes. But I think overall, I really like the world building a lot. I thought it was kind of doing something kind of unique I haven't really seen, with the Atlantic stuff. And um I felt like the first third was interesting because it was very lore heavy, and there was a lot of info dumping at times. And rather than, I guess, like characters having a lot of dialogue and you kind of find out stuff as they're speaking, or through circumstances that are happening, it was a lot more explanation, which actually served the rest of the book well. But it wasn't necessarily the most engaged. I wasn't like fully engaged at that point. I think the beach scene was really the turning point for me. I'll just leave it at that because I know spoiler free. But I thought that whole sequence was actually fantastic. I was completely engaged. And then I think it was a lot of that, where there were certain parts I was more engaged with, certain parts I wasn't. But I really admired that, like, PL was, had made some choices on how these characters should be. Whether I felt necessarily engaged at every moment or not, it was a choice that was very intentional. Like Othrun's character, I had I had real struggles with this guy, because I just had trouble connecting with him because he's kind of a crass, very not the most likable of characters. So that I'll just keep it there. But yeah, so I think there were things I struggled with, but ultimately I'm excited for the second book, to see where the story goes, because I think first books are always interesting, especially in an epic fantasy series. Like, it could go so many different directions, and it's often, I find, the second book where you really see the authorial voice, and then also like the world come into its own. I found that to be true in a lot of fantasy series. So I'm curious, yeah. But yeah, that was my thoughts. I guess maybe complex, but
Yeah, that makes sense. I enjoyed a lot of things about this book. This book was definitely one of the I don't know, it sounds kind of weird to say, but one of the more like fun reads of the month for me. Um when I'm looking at like my favorite like styles of especially sci-fi and fantasy stuff, I am a big like sucker for your first person narrated stories. So whether that's The Name of the Wind, whether that's The Sun Eater, Book of the New Sun, the Prince of Thorns books, like I love that style. And so that is going for this book. And then the other side of it is I love I don't know how to say this, uh like arrogant pompous fools as characters. So like in the first WoW trilogy, like Giselle is my favorite. He cracks me up. I laugh all the time at him being like just offended that somebody, stepped on his dignity or whatever, or somebody asked him to do something that's beneath him. And Othrin, I felt like played right into that same type of character. And so I had a blast reading from his point of view. He'd say something that he's like offended by something a pagan does, and I'm just cracking up. Is like, can you believe this guy? And it's sort of like Othran is a much, I would say, like better and moral character than somebody like Jorg Ancraft. He's certainly not as dark or as tortured, but it is a similar type of character in the sense of you need to be okay like watching the journey and not necessarily be like, well, it has to be a character that I ethically agree with everything that they do in order for me to root for them. Which like some readers don't want to do. And I was like, all right, fair enough, But for me, I loved watching that journey, and I think PL does something that some first-person stories struggle with, which is having a great cast of side characters that are distinct and memorable. Where it's like by the end of the book, I felt like I knew Othrin's uncle. Like I've met guys like that, and I had a clear idea of who he was. I felt like even though he wasn't in the story as much, his father, his brother, some of his cousins, the witch lady that I'm already forgetting her name. But like they all felt like distinct characters to me. So I do have my quibbles. I do have some issues with it, but overall I'm positive on it. I enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm sure I'll have more things to say later on. But yeah, I liked getting to read this for sure.
All right, my turn. I really my favorite thing about it was digging into the main character's engagement with his religion. I think one thing that's going to be very interesting, and I definitely want to save some more of the detailed conversation about this for later, I think it'd be interesting to see what category people place this character into in terms of like how they feel about his religious convictions. I think for somebody who like maybe has a slightly negative experience in regards to religious people doing what they say they're going to do, some people may read this book and be like, this is just religious people, right? And then for someone on my end of the spectrum, it was like, this is somebody who actually doesn't believe what they say they believe, but they need to do this thing in order to further themselves, or have convinced themselves that they actually love this deity, but their actions speak otherwise, right? Because of where I come from. And so that was probably the thing I enjoyed the most, engaging with that. And I definitely have some specific things I want to touch on when we get to spoilers. The thing I struggled with the most was definitely the pacing. The first third is a lot of lore dump and almost no dialogue, and then the second third is like mostly dialogue, and that felt a little jarring for me. I've never read any of like the classic epics, and so I think that was probably something that like I'm not going to catch what some of you guys caught in terms of what he was going for. Me and Jake have had this conversation before, and David as well, about when the author accomplishes his intended goal and it maybe just doesn't work for you, right? And I think that's a very important distinction. He didn't fail to do what he was doing, even in the places that I didn't like that much. He was definitely accomplishing his goal. It just might not have been for me in that moment. But the character study, I think, was what stuck out the most for me on a positive end.
Cool. Yeah. Absolutely. I say if you don't have problems with Othran, then I question your your sanity. I mean, and he is a very deeply flawed character and fascinating for that reason. I really appreciate what Preacher just said too, actually, because I think that what PL is going for here is not necessarily going to be something that a lot of modern fantasy readers are going to immediately be okay with. They're going to be a little bit adrift, I think, because he is definitely invoking those epic classics. And, for me, I dig that so much. I love it. It's my playground, but I totally understand if somebody, who's not familiar with the, especially for me, it was the Aeneid that it really, as Nikhil already mentioned, but also, the Greek epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's just so reminiscent of those in so many ways, in the way the story proceeds, and a bit of the language being archaic and all of that. And I love that sort of thing. For me, often, actually, I feel like a lot of modern fantasy doesn't try enough to give me a difference. It reads very modern to me. And if you're supposed to be giving me the feel of an ancient world, but your characters sound like they're in New Jersey, in 2025, it doesn't quite work for me. I find that to be immersion busting. So I love it when an author goes for it in that way. And I can't wait to see how PL develops this world that he has, laid down the foundations here, and totally get the difficulty of a book one. And it's a real problem for a writer to say, okay, well, I need to give my reader a sense of this world. I need to give them a sense of the foundation of the plot and everything. So book one, I think, is the hardest one to write in so many ways. But I can't wait to see where he goes with it. And I'm a fan of what PL has accomplished here. I do get, though, if somebody were to say to me, yeah, I just couldn't get into it, the prose was just a little weird for me, it was too archaic, or the legitimate, observations that a couple of you already made about the pacing in the beginning. I believe, though, that these things are going to have payoff. I think that, like Jenny Ward said in the comments, this is one of these things where I feel like, this is going to have payoff down the road here. And hopefully, exactly. Yeah, you have to trust the author. Give it a chance. Yeah, I'd say to people, give that a chance, see where it goes. We have unfortunately, these days, we are definitely in a impress me right away or I'm going away, kind of culture, the immediate dopamine hit or whatever. So I think that I would just advocate that if it is a little bit difficult at first, give it a chance. Give it let's see where he goes. And I universally hear, I have not continued in the series yet, but I universally hear from people who've read the series that it gets better and better with each book. So I'm excited. But yeah, great to hear all your thoughts so far.
Do you know, I don't think I'm going to say very much that hasn't been said already. I was initially a little bit thrown by the book. I wasn't quite sure what it was trying to do, because in my mind, when I hear words, like old-fashioned and classical, my mind kind of goes to The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, whereas this goes much, much, much further back. And I think it took that realization for me that Shay and Philip, you guys have already pointed out, that no, it's doing something a little bit more ancient, for me to kind of unlock what the book was trying to do. And I think, as you said, Preacher, the book is what it's setting out to do. It's doing fabulously. But it's also very much kind of marching to the beat of its own drum. It does what it wants to do. I mean, I audiobooked sections, and there's about 10 or 15 pages near the beginning that is just description of Atalantics. And initially I'm like, oh, this is going quite long. And then there are other sections that we're talking about pacing and structure where I might have liked more, but are very, very brief and curt. But I do have confidence in P.L. Stewart that those are all kind of deliberate stylistic decisions. And once I kind of had that unlocking moment where I kind of reset what this book was trying to do, I did find lots of positivity in it, and I guess some discussions we'll get into later on. Stuff like the character of Ultron, I find very interesting. That in some sense he's this religious, quite moral, quite a guy with a code, and at the same time, and within the first chapter, so I wouldn't use it as a spoiler, he kind of says, yeah, and I'm going to betray all these people later. That's just part of the game plan. And then similarly, I also really enjoy the representation of magic and the supernatural in this novel. I find that really fascinating, and I don't want to say anything more about that because that is a spoiler. But the interplay of the supernatural with the mundane in this world, I find very fascinating as well. So a very intriguing experience with this first book, if I could say.
Yeah, wow. I echo, a lot of what's been said already, so I won't just rehash all of it. But I think I'll underscore maybe a couple things and then try to add something hopefully unique. Is the style is very different. That I think, like it sounds like most of us, it took me a minute to kind of get used to it and kind of see what it was doing. Because I also haven't. I think I read like an abridged version of the Odyssey or something back in high school or whatever, right? So like it was a new thing to me. And David actually pointed this out to me. I say we've been buddy reading. I've been slacking a lot on reading The Death of King Arthur, but he pointed that out, and I was like, oh, that is actually a good comparison. It does feel kind of similar to that sort of thing. But so I think, Philip, you said this, that like I can totally see a lot of people who like just big modern fantasy readers maybe not vibing with it a ton, at least at the beginning. But if they give it a chance, some of the battle scenes in here were great. I think the pacing is an interesting one to me because I've been thinking about pacing a lot. I was listening to Christopher Rocchio actually said this, that he's like, the way we talk about pacing is weird because ultimately I think what we're actually talking about is just enjoyment and not it's enjoyment and how many action scenes were in it is what people mostly mean when they say pacing. And I'm like, it's an interesting idea because I think about, some of the dinner scene in Dune or a lot of those council table scenes in Song of Ice and Fire are so gripping. And like, I don't think we would really say that we wouldn't criticize the pacing necessarily. Right.
They have tension. Right.
Yes. Yeah. There's so much tension. And while I think some of those dialogue, Preacher, you mentioned this, and I would agree, some of the dialogue heavy chapters in that second third or so are very dialogue heavy. And I thought that it felt at times a little bit repetitive. They might just say the same thing a few times. So maybe it could have been trimmed a little bit, but nonetheless, I had that feeling, but at the same time, I was really interested in what was being discussed. And so I don't know, I'm kind of two minds about the pacing. And I thought the battle scenes were great. The action that was in there was great. So I don't know, I'm of two minds about that. But as everyone has said, Othrin was super interesting, and seeing like what David said about the magic and how that's kind of discussed in the story. There's a lot of very interesting and very things I'm not sure I've really read something like this before. aspects of it that I really really enjoyed. So yeah, I'm super excited to continue the series and kind of see where it goes and see if some of the things that some of us might have some nitpicks about in this first book, we'll see how that kind of smooths out, or how our how in hindsight maybe they feel slightly different as we get a little bit deeper into the story or something. But
Yeah, what you said about pacing, bringing back to what Rockio said on that, I feel like I'm on the side of the fence where unless like clear stakes are laid out, I get bored during action. Like mainly action scenes have a hard time keeping me engaged unless there has been some thorough setting of stakes for me. So I kind of like that the action was later on in the book. I do think if I were to split it into like quarters, and I'm actually Sam said this and I resonate a lot with it. It's really that third quarter where the pacing kind of slows down a little bit. And I could see how that wouldn't gel for a lot of people. Me having read, like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, I really liked how he took a more modern approach to that. And then a lot of y'all mentioned Othrun as a character. And what I actually found for me is like I went into this hearing moral, the main character was morally corrupt and how awful he was. And I actually found him surprisingly noble when I read the book. Like a lot of his long-term aspirations are pretty awful, but if we look at his actions, they almost never coincide with what his long-term plans are. Like he has these prejudices. He thinks, oh, these pagans suck. And then he meets them. And like when actually faced with, an individual instead of just this, idea of a pagan, when he actually meets these men, he's able to see the nobility in them and he doesn't act how he originally thought he would setting out. So I actually found, as awful and prejudiced as Othrun is, I'm not giving him a pass. For myself, I went in with a lot of like preconceived, like, oh, Othrun is pretty morally corrupt, and I actually found him to be pretty virtuous in some aspects. But yeah, I definitely see some of the interests that people have in it. And I see some of the negativities, like how some people would have an issue with that structure and with that main character. But I think
if I could add to the pacing thing real quick, sorry.
Mhm.
I think one interesting conversation, a lot of people when they talk about good pacing, they really tend to almost sound like they just mean consistent pacing, which sometimes is important, right? Where it's like, okay, the book flowed consistently. But sometimes inconsistent pacing, when done on purpose, can actually be like really good pacing. And I was trying to think of a good book example for this, but I'm going to actually use a movie. The bar scene in Inglourious Bastards is the most inconsistently paced movie like change in pace I've ever experienced. But Philip mentioned the word tense. It was so tense. Yeah. And the slowing down was so purposeful to just get you going like, oh my God, when is it going to happen? Right. And I think in books that can happen as well. And really it just comes down to, does that change in pace accomplish like whatever goal existed there to force the reader into some feeling? Or has the author just kind of like lost the pace of the novel? And so I think for this one, while the pacing didn't work for me in a lot of ways, it probably mirrors and images those classical works and is 100% purposeful. And so I think, saying bad pacing, oftentimes I think most people mean inconsistent, but a lot of times inconsistent pacing is up and go, whoa, what's happening?
Yeah.
Right.
That's well said. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that quite a bit. I was thinking we could shift gears and talk spoilers and mention some things from the book that worked with us. We can get a little bit more nitty gritty and talk about. I know that there are some things that didn't work for some readers and some parts that we all really loved. So I'm gonna go ahead. Spoilers.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'll just go first here and talk about some things that I really liked about the book. So we get the prologue, we get the introduction that Atlantis was drowned, that the kingdom was drowned, and the prologue, first introduces the story. I really liked that. I liked seeing why Othrum was so attached to his religion and to his home kingdom. But I think where a lot of people hit a snag is in that, towards the back end of that second act and near the beginning of that third act, where you get on the island, you have him versus Hor, which I thought was a really good. Before we start recording, David mentioned that in his head he was imagining the word whore, but
it's how it's pronounced in the audiobook. I'm not just throwing that out
hurt
of nowhere.
son of whore.
Hurt and whore I thought were spelled like so, but it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me.
No, yeah, that's how I was pronouncing them in my head. So I feel like the audiobook narrator. I mean, how else would you pronounce HOR?
Yeah, it's like the horrific, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll go around again and just with more spoilers with just talk about what we enjoyed about the book.
Cool.
So
Yeah, I felt, especially now hearing everybody's thoughts on, the pacing and this and that. I think like the beginning, the prologue, and then that first third, I did find the characters themselves pretty compelling throughout, which was pretty great to see, from the beginning, even with some of the info dumping and this and that. And I do feel like it's like, even though there were certain aspects of that first third that didn't gel with me as much on the first glance, I think, as Jenny Ward said, like, trust the author benefit, because I did find that all that was very beneficial reading continuing the book, because he throws a lot at you in this first entry. And,
Right.
if one wasn't like enveloped by all this lore from the get-go, it might have been harder actually to follow what comes later. So I thought that was really great. I think the actual sequence of the drowning of the kingdom, it happened kind of a little fast for
I
me.
agree.
I would have kind of liked to see a little bit more of that.
Can I interrupt there very
Yeah,
quickly?
yeah,
Because I
yeah.
looked at this passage because I had the same impression.
Oh, yeah.
It's 3 paragraphs. The whole cataclysm happens in 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, and maybe it's, now that we're talking about this, like, Othrun's perspective. If we're seeing everything from his perspective, the actual cataclysm would also be from his perspective. So maybe it is 3 paragraphs, and it's not necessarily from the reader's experience. That's just a thought that occurred to me. But I loved the battle sequences. I thought like the battle between Throne and Hor, the horrific. I'll just go with it, was really great. I really enjoyed the politicking of Welly and Hurd, I think it was, and kind of some of the double crossing, and a lot of that stuff was actually really interesting to me. So yeah, overall, I thought like there was a lot I enjoyed, and I think there were certain parts that I didn't enjoy as much. Like, the stakes were a little bit up and down for me, because sometimes you'd be getting into an action sequence and then suddenly stepping back and doing more, lore exploration. So sometimes it kind of cut the tension for me a little bit, but it was probably ultimately to the series' benefit for the readers. So I think maybe going forward, I'll probably just like, try to leave my preconceived notions at the door a little bit and just let myself fall into it in the second entry. That's kind of, it was a learning experience in that sense of like how to. Yeah, I don't know if you all feel this way, but I feel like with every author, they have a different signature. So sometimes you kind of have to figure out how to best read something to get the most out of it, and this was no exception to me. So yeah, that's, I guess, maybe my thoughts on.
I think
Can I throw out one
I'm sitting with you the same on, like, I was expecting a little bit more from the actual drowning, and
Yeah.
like we never even got like a real explanation. We're like, we think it could be this that caused it, or this.
Totally.
Can I throw out one thing really quick
Yeah.
too? Just about that part, because I had the same thought. I was like, oh, I wanted more natural disaster, crazy. Like this is such a good opportunity for action and horror and all these things. And Nikhil, I agree with you that like it's not from, you know, somebody's perspective who's on the island still, so we're not going to see everything. I was also thinking, this is Othrin telling us the story, right? And so this is obviously a horrible thing that he also is supposedly forewarned about to be leaving. And so I wonder, is he purposely glossing over it in his retelling of it because it was either so awful and he just doesn't want to relive it, or something like that, right? So like maybe I'm coping and coming up with a reason to make it. He spends a lot of time talking about things that he loves, right? When he's whatever chapter that is, where he's just going through the city and the pear shape and all this stuff, and then but then things that he doesn't love, it's much more concise. So I'm like, oh, okay, well maybe that makes sense.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah, I think you're
can
absolutely
I
right
jump on
about
that
that.
too? Because sorry, just very quickly, I totally resonate with that, Jake, because actually the chapter following, Othrin is discussing everyone else's reactions to the cataclysm. You know, he's saying everyone's crying, everyone's wearing different colors, and I noticed that he never actually talks about his own emotional reaction to that cataclysm. He just talks about what he's going to do next, how he's going to rise to that challenge. Yeah,
I mean, I think in a lot of ways he'd already given up on Atlantics, because like he wasn't gonna ever be able to be who he wanted to be there if his brother was in power. So what I found that was interesting about the lack of detail there was that if you kind of play the scenario that he's super unreliable and he isn't visited by an angel, maybe, right? That's what we're being told. Why wasn't he there? Like, and then you start to kind of like piece together and ask some questions that are just unanswered in terms of like, well, if he is unreliable and the angel thing is a little bit of a stretch, then what is the answer for how him and his people just happen not to be on the island? And it's not answered, but it is interesting to even for that to come to mind. And I think if he would have been very detailed about the happening, then maybe he would have left less room for that wondering.
Right. It does feel a little jarring that he's like, and my whole kingdom got swallowed by the
After
ocean.
describing it for an hour.
Immediately segues.
it was like a heavy metal music video, right? Like the volcanoes go off, and then there's an earthquake, and then there's a tsunami, and then it sputters down into a whirlpool. It's like, man, this would make a really good music video.
And he just flippantly blames it on the sacrifices into the volcano, and then moves on.
It is true though, and I think I'll interrupt Sam. Poor Sam is waiting to say something. I think just one little contribution to this discussion. It is true that life-changing, cataclysmic things often happen. Like, bam. There is a kind of, and I don't know if what BPL was going for something like that there with the brevity of it. It's just like boom, and it could be a stylistic thing too. Again, where a lot of older style, like famously, the Battle of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers is like 3 paragraphs or whatever, right? And in the movie, it's just drawn out long thing. So that it may again be a matter of taste there as well, taste changing. But I think that for me anyway, the cataclysmic, life-changing events often happen just in the blink of an eye, and you're just sort of processing it afterwards. Like the more interesting thing is, wow, what just happened there? The processing of it is almost self. But yeah. Anyway, sorry, Sam. I know you're waiting.
No, that's well said, Philip. I think for me it was less like, oh, it happened really quickly, and much like kind of what Zach said a second ago. Like he was about as upset as like if his tree fort had gotten cut down, versus like the first fourth of this book talk about how much he loves it and he all these parts and how beautiful it is, and like yes, he has a complicated relationship with it, but maybe there was something missing there. But I don't know, like Othran's an interesting character as a narrator, kind of on something that you guys were saying there. It's like, okay, so he's writing his own life. There's a question of reliability with these types of books, that always gets brought up. But part of that is that I was thinking about as I was Othran is writing this, because I didn't feel like we got a clear answer to that. And say with something like the Sun Eater, like Hadrian Marlowe says at the beginning that he's writing from, centuries later, and he's looking back on this long life and he's reflecting on it, and then with like The Name of the Wind, like both very clearly, like, here's who I was as a boy, here I am as an old man, just a lowly tavern keeper. And so you get a clear impression, big difference. And what was interesting to me was some of because we're talking about Othran's worldview and his prejudices and things like that coming through. Some of that comes through in the narration, not just in like the past young Othran's actions. Some of that comes about just in him writing it, like how he talks about things or how he views things. So it made me wonder if maybe, like, this is written very shortly after these events and he's writing it down, and then maybe the next books will be, like, and I pick up the pen again and now I'm writing about what's happened over the last few years. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see as it goes on. But
Yeah, I had similar thoughts because it's like a lot of his prejudices feel like they persist even as he's recounting this to us. So it's like, what kind of arc are we going to see? Because he's like, as he's writing, he's like, those pagans. So it's like, when he's recounting it, but it definitely feels like there is a recounting going on.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So I could absolutely be wrong. My feeling as I was reading this was that we start with the prologue and he's like, hey, the kingdom is drowned and it's only these 1,800 of us left, and we rebelled against the kingdom, and now we are, I'm going to tell you how we got here. And then we go through, which I expected this to be the entire book one, probably, right? Like I expected the drowning of the kingdom to be the main climax of book one. But it happens at the end of this first part, which I thought was awesome. Caught me off guard and it was great. But I wonder, is that the end of his like memoir recounting his story, and now it's just a first person narrative? Does that make sense? So like that's kind of what my experience felt like was once we get to them leading on those ships and going towards Acremia, that they were like, maybe this is no longer him sitting back in the future telling us his story. Maybe now we're just sort of normal first person narration. Does that make sense?
So Jake, you're saying as if he were like sitting in front of us telling the story shortly after it happened, kind of.
Yeah, like yeah, unless I don't know, maybe I'm just wrong. Like, is there a is it sort of an assumption that a first person narrative is somebody recounting the story? I mean, I suppose it is.
Clearly read like, no, this is just, it's just the point of view from which it's told, So I do think that's a possibility, right, Jake, for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Shay. Are you just seeing that Vaughn's saying that the audio was a little bit choppy?
Yeah, I'm seeing that. I just don't know.
It's usually StreamYard. Sorry to disrupt our. Yeah.
Okay.
It's those damn pagan goddesses, guys. That's what it is.
So
goddesses are getting.
Yeah. I'm gonna agree with Jake. I read it more as the would it be first person present, especially in the back 2/3 of the book. Like we were experiencing it with him, because there is little to no introspection at all in the second 2/3 of the book.
Right.
Like he doesn't meet someone and go, and when I met her, man, did I think she was hot. Right? He just says, I see her and I think she's hot. Right. At least that's how it kind of came across to me. And maybe it's just because there's not as much introspection as you get in like Empire of the Vampire and Name of the Wind and Sun Eater.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely read it more like Jake, especially the second 2/3.
Preacher, can you talk to us about your enjoyment of Orthrun?
All right. First off, I'm going to say that I do like big hat tip to PL for like going for it in some subversion. And so like an hour of describing this place and setting up the brother and setting up his pagan wife and them kind of like slowly shifting the entire culture of this place, and then it's all gone. It's all gone, and the whole narrative is completely changed. Right, like that takes some cojones to do, and I thought he went for it, and I thought it was accomplished well in terms of that subversion. Didn't feel forced. As far as the main character goes, the things that stuck out for me are mainly going to be around like kind of his religious convictions. I read him as an extremely unreliable, self-centered, faux religious person who actually doesn't have any of the convictions that he sometimes he sometimes holds to. And I think it's perfectly framed by the way that the book is framed, right? So he hates his brother for sleeping with a pagan woman, and by the end of the book, there's little keeping his pants on, right? Like he hasn't done it yet, but like, let's be honest, religious conviction is not what is keeping him from making that decision.
Even
like,
at the time, he was super jealous. Like you could tell he wished it with him.
No, 100%. And he says, like, I knew from the beginning because he says, and you know, in our religion, you cannot do X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, we're all doing X, Y, and Z, but like we don't talk about it, right? He even just admits, like, he wasn't a virgin. Like everyone around, it wasn't even that his brother was sleeping with this woman; is that he was doing it publicly, right? And so, like every time religious conviction came up after that, I filed it into the exact same bucket of I only hold to these convictions if it accomplishes something for me in terms of like my public persona or as a power grab. Now, has he convinced himself that he is pious and zealous? Probably. I think the thing that kept coming up for me, and you know, not to get all biblical on us, right? But like in Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah is talking to the people of Israel, and he basically says, "Hey, God sees that you've done all of the festivals, and you're keeping all of the outward commandments, and you're even doing the sacrifices. He hates all of it. It even says in Isaiah 1, like, your incense smells like poop," is basically the phrase he uses, because you don't actually love me. You're doing all the stuff. You're saying all right, you know, and like I felt like Othran was a fall of Israel type of character, right? Moses comes down from the mountain, and they're already worshiping the false god. Like that's the vibe I got from that.
How is that a rant? I thought that was a very intelligent read of his character. That didn't sound like a rant.
You said it for the soapbox.
That was not a rant. Speaking of which, one of the things I like about what PL does here in making me feel complex feelings about these characters, and Elthran particularly, but a lot of his relationships are full of tension and comfortable. In the beginning, you know, he is his brother, kind of hates him, he's jealous of him. You can see that in what he says. And I don't think he's entirely a reliable narrator either. You know, we're getting his perspective. That's important to keep in mind. And he's continuously justifying himself. And I think I agree with Preacher. He's fooling himself a lot of the time. But I really love how he seems so conflicted in all these relationships. I think you also alluded to his feelings about Lycie, the witch lady in the later parts. Clearly, he is very attracted to her, and yet, you know, at least to maintain appearances or whatever it might be, he sort of initially rejects her a couple times actually, but we can kind of see where this is going here, right? And there's a real complexity in that. There's he kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too, I suppose, but doesn't want anyone to know he's doing it. But I love that. And you also have characters that he's. So you've got what's the horse son's name? Hurt, right.
Hurt.
You've got Hurt there, who becomes, if I remember correctly, his ally after Ultron kills Hor, right? Or he kills his father, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got that. All right. It's been a couple of years, but yeah, again, complexity in all these relationships, and that's a really great opportunity for character development and for conflict and for tension to be on the page. So this is something that I really enjoy about the book as a whole.
It's something that he keeps coming back to as well. Is just there's quite a lot of repetition, purposefully so, I think, from Orthron's POV, and like he keeps revisiting old scenes. And I think the scene he revisits the most is his brother rutting with I forget her name. Forgive me.
Dira, I think.
Dira. Checking my Google Doc on the side. He just keeps coming back to that. I think there's a really great kind of balance between, as he's talking to Lacey, and even says to her at one point, "Yes, I think you're gorgeous." And I love how his wife then calls him out later on. He's like, "No, I was just politicking," and she was like, "No, you were not." I really enjoy quite interesting and engaging, and I think there's a level of complexity there. I also kind of building on that. There's the point where he's trying to decide what his standard is going to be. And how is he going to kind of match the lion and the wolf standards that are in this camp? And he goes, "I'm going to have a dragon," and it's like it's a black dragon on a red sky or something like that. Like he goes hard with it. He's like, "I'm going to subtly nod that I am, superior to these people, and we can deal with that when it comes." There's a level of ambition. There's a strange moral code which is kind of flexible and kind of inflexible. And although I'd never want to have a coffee with the guy, I do find him quite intriguing to read.
Speaking on his banner, I really loved the imagery of that scene where he's kind of like spacing out and you see the dragon in the maw of the lion. That was some really cool foreshadowing. I like that quite a bit.
Another good relationship that I think highlights like his complexity is his relationship with, and I'm blanking on the name, basically the priest who he finds out is a little bit more is a little less monotheistic than he would like, right? And like his reaction is so viscerally like, "Ooh, I thought this guy was supposed to be, my uncle said this was the dude that I'm supposed to be like connecting myself to religiously," and like he admits that magic is real, and like, dude, you just saw magic be real. What are you talking about, right? Like in his head, he has these visceral religious responses, but like they feel real in a sense, but they feel played up to me, right? Just based on his actions, right? Like, because he's telling me this story, he wants me to know that when that guy said that thing about the magic, it was awful, right? But then his actions don't really show that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty realistic, to be honest. I mean, unfortunately, at least in my experience, many people are not quite as religious at their core as they might outwardly project that they are. Certainly not everybody. There's obviously tons of people who are very devout, and it's very important to them. But I think some people, it's a little bit of virtue signaling in some ways, or maybe it's not always nefarious. Maybe they really want to aspire to that, but like at their core, they don't truly believe, and therefore their actions don't always reflect what they say. And I think that's. I don't know. I just appreciate seeing it sort of written in that way, and seeing the layers, like you brought up the priest, where like he is, at least seems like a very devout believer, but he has like some different ideas, and that Othran isn't comfortable with. But I've experienced that. You see people who live in a certain way and believe certain things, but they might say something that catches you off guard, but that's just like their experience and their perspective, and maybe their wisdom kind of shining through of. You like, all right, young blood, you might think it's all black and white, but it's actually not quite like that, So I don't know. I liked all of the different ways that the religious aspect of these characters was sort of shown to us. I think it just felt really realistic to me.
There's a really good line where it's in that conversation where the priest says to Orthrin, "You would be a good priest," and then he goes back and he says, I can't remember exactly, "You would be a good druid," or "You would be a good magician," and that kind of biting back and forth between the two of them.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Was it Glathan that put him on to that?
Yeah,
priest?
I think Glathan recommended
Sounds
him to him. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that should have been the first sign that the priest was not like, super not world weary. Like Glathan's pretty world weary, and it to me was like a voice of reason for Othrin throughout most of the book. Though he knew when to pick his time and be like, well, actually, these people aren't ignorant. Well, you'll get it eventually. Like he picks his battles. But I liked that dynamic, and yeah, like as you mentioned, Preacher, that conversation with the priest of that like third quarter that slowed down. I think that conversation with the priest was probably the highlight of that section. I really love that conversation between them. So thank you for bringing that up.
Personally, I felt, and I think this comes out because when PL pitches the book or when you hear it described, often the religious conflict is one of the things that is highlighted. It's like, oh, he comes from a highly monotheistic society and has to encounter paganism in a new way. And I don't know if this is a criticism as much as an observation, but I had sort of mixed feelings about how some of that is executed. Well, in a couple ways. One is that Othrin's culture is modeled after Atlantis, set, which according to Plato's writing, if I'm remembering correctly, and then a lot of the religious elements that are folded in to his monotheistic belief read very modern, like in the last 500 years modern. And so for me personally, I felt like most of the religious conflict that was really interesting was what you guys talk about, of him encountering magic and seeing things in a new way, and like, oh, I've kind of been going through the motions and like, oh crap, like here's an angel talking to me and now says that he's, my dad. What's with that? And I found that much more compelling than the actual like religious arguments that Othrin was having, or doesn't have very good arguments for. But some of those arguments read a little, I don't know, maybe read it to me in terms of the actual argument that was had versus how it played out in the story. I felt like was done in a much more
it actually and this may be just because this is like what I'm steeped in. There's a kind of an internal theological battle in my circles between very strict, hard, like traditional monotheism, and some scholars like Michael Heiser who hold to kind of a modified monotheism, almost like a henotheism type of view, where the word gods in the Old Testament refers to spiritual beings that are in kind similar to God but aren't eternal, right? And so like a lot of strict monotheists struggle to even engage with guys like Heiser. Like he's passed now. Because like their initial reaction is like, that's polytheism, or like that's unbiblical. And he's like, well, in this passage here, it says that like these are created beings, but they're of the same spiritual type as Yahweh, right? And like I felt in a very similar way that like this character had a very narrow, strict view of how monotheism would function. Like if just because God is the only uncreated being in your religion doesn't mean there aren't other strong spiritual forces that exist in your world, right? And for him, it was almost this black and white, like it's either God's it, or there's magic and all these other things, and those two things can't cohere in any real way. And it just kind of reminded me of the Divine Council Heiser stuff, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
There's quite a few kind of biblical beats, weren't there? I mean, the whole story of Exodus, sort of, there's a parallel there. And the angel announcing fatherhood to the protagonist kind of almost paints him in a semi-Jesus, or I know that's a bit of a stretch in some ways, but also the story of Samuel. I was thinking of Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the story of Samuel, with him being called repeatedly, and he wakes up in the night and then he finds this angel. Don't trust that angel, by the way. But I don't think any of us necessarily do. But yeah, I'm always fascinated by books. I think I said this at the beginning, where the supernatural and especially almost divinity clearly exists, and characters having to engage with the reality of divinity, even if they can't work out exactly what the intentions of that divinity is. I think that's a really interesting conversation. I
You
think
bring up the
my
angel. I thought it was interesting that he went the route of like a divine son, but unlike the Christian story, this angel actually had sex with his mom, right? Like it was like a much more morally gray version of the traditional Christian story, and it's even brought up by Lacey, I believe, right? She's like, "So you're telling me?" Or somebody, it's brought by somebody. They're like, "Wait, so you're telling me this angel deceived your mom?" And he's like, "Wait, crap."
Well, it's very
so
Arthurian, right?
Yeah.
Like how King Arthur.
maybe I've never read it.
Is it No, is it the priest that was like, so you believe this angel cuckolded your father?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's also like a lot of Greek mythology,
Mm.
where you have gods messing around, and Zeus doing his thing with various women and whatnot, and you've got this divine interference, and I think it is ambiguous. Is this good or bad? Where this is coming from, much like the Greek myths too. The people, they're up there with their machinations and their strings attached to us and doing their thing. I feel like Othron might be less special than he thinks. He might be getting used a little more than I realize.
Yeah. And he
I also
brings
wonder if it's even real. Like, is this just a figment of his imagination that he wants this to be the case to justify his actions?
the building of the myth.
Well, he learns a language via the angel, doesn't he?
Yes,
clearly
that
wrote
was the
something
one
down.
that threw, because until
true.
the language,
Okay.
I thought he had like some sort of disorder going on. I'm like, he's seeing something that isn't there. He's hallucinating.
Mhm.
And then when he just started speaking a language that he never learned, I was like, okay, something's going on. Whether it's the oncology of his religion.
I think the
ask you
angel
a
actually
question?
leaving, the angel actually like disappearing made me more believing that he was not a lie, because like if this story was a lie, the angel would continue to come and tell him what to do and justify his actions, and the angel pops smoke, and it's like,
Can I ask Nikhil a question, Phil? Because you said your favorite scene was the beach scene.
Mhm.
They're on the beach for about 150 pages. I'm curious what parts of the beach you really resonated with.
I thought the whole battle sequence with him, with Othron and Hor, and then the subsequent politicking of like trying to figure out the alliances with Welly and Herd. I thought it was it was very unique. I've never seen anything like that actually in fantasy, as that kind of a way to solve their issue, and subsequently create more issues. But that's neither here nor there. But I did find that whole sequence was really riveting.
Where you do find similar things is in the Aeneid again. It's the story of a cataclysm and the founder of a new nation and people fleeing that cataclysm and then starting anew. And having to figure out rivals and make allies out of foes, etc. So yeah.
I was also thinking of the Sundered Nation trilogy. There's also a standoff that happens in book one that's very similar, and then that is the basis from which a community is built.
Well, to your point, David, also on the biblical stuff, like it's very David and Goliath too. That confrontation on the beach. He pulls a lot from different mythic parts, which I think helps the style of the book with the way it's written, pulling and making it feel mythic, both in the way it's told, but then also the archetypes that he's using. I like that.
I have a thought I'd like to throw out and see what you guys thought of this. I think the thing that I'm probably the most interested in at this point is Othron sort of being confronted with, Janie put a comment kind of similar with this too, being confronted with these ideas that conflict with at least what he says he believes and what he's sort of grown up with. This is very, very a topic that's extremely interesting to me, because the not just from the story specifically, but I actually told this to Sam the other day. Like, I personally am somewhere between agnostic and Christian. I'm not really sure where I am. I'm somewhere in the middle. And it's something that I'm sort of exploring. And I think the reason I'm in the middle is because I was raised Christian and then one day realized, oh, this is just what my mom and dad told me. Like, I don't actually know if I truly believe this, right? And so then you see these things that makes you question and things that make you believe more, things maybe make you believe less. And so I just find that journey really, really interesting. And I'm curious sort of what you guys thought of that, because we saw his whole world kind of got rocked a couple of times, right? Like in each way, you know, he sees the angel and he sees the drowning of the kingdom, and that really solidifies his beliefs. And then he sees, you know, this priest that's like, hey, actually, if this angel did, you know, cuckolded your mom or what, like this, just like, okay, that's weird. That doesn't seem like a very holy thing. Or then as he's going and he realizes his prejudices against the original people who lived in Crimea. He calls them the black people. I don't remember the actual name, but like it's a similar idea. This way, it's not as religious as it is maybe some other cultural things, but just seeing him being like ping pong back and forth between his beliefs and the things that he sees and experiences. The magic, same thing. That he's like, magic can't be real. These pagan goddesses can't be real. Oh wait, she just made this dude's nose bleed and this grave was bleeding. Oh well, actually that's explainable. There's this fog. Oh, it's natural fog. Oh wait, is it natural fog? Like he just keeps going back and forth, and I find it fascinating. It's probably the thing I'm the most interested in at this point.
But you know, that's one of the reasons I love reading so much. Not to just immediately pull us away from P.L. Stewart's book, but one of the reasons I love reading so much is it reveals to me my own kind of thought processes that I hadn't encountered before.
Totally.
Travel does the same thing, but like reading is one of the reasons I just have such pleasure in it. Is it makes me kind of reset thoughts about people's or responses or my own emotional responses to things. It's a really good way of kind of reflection and self-assessment. So yeah, I totally agree with your enthusiasm there.
And going off of what Jake said about, you know, Othrune's different prejudices, religious background. I know, Preacher, earlier you were like, I'm the least well-read in fantasy, but like hearing you and Sam both talk about your faith and how y'all thought about that going into Drowned Kingdom. Huh? Wait, what did you say?
Let's say you call it my faith fantasy? No, it was a joke.
No.
This is why I'm stuck in the middle, guys.
That faith background is something that I don't have a lot of knowledge on. So it's very interesting you brought up a lot of good points about Othrune's connection with his faith that are kind of harder for me to make, considering I can be like, oh, this reminds me of Virgil's Aeneid, but I can't I don't have that connection with faith, and I can't, make those connections in the text.
Yeah,
so it's
I think
hearing.
I think like connecting both what you and Jake are talking about, like I think there's a difference between having an established worldview in your head, right? And there's a book by a guy named James K. Smith. He's like a theologist, sociologist. It's called "You Are What You Love," and the whole concept of it is you are not the sum of the things you know. You're actually the sum of the things that you're passionate about or that you desire, right? We make choices based off of what we want, not off of what we know more often than not. And so, like, I think when you have someone who has a worldview system that stops at the head and doesn't go to the heart, that's when you run into people like Othrun, right? Who regularly struggle to act out the things that they say they believe. But also that is when I think that like worldview shattering moments tend to happen more, right? That like something happens that is outside of your box and you're just like, this must just all be wrong. Right. And so like as a person of faith, I've seen that like in the church, I've seen it outside of the church. One of the reasons I love cosmic horror so much is because I think that it deals with that concept better than any other subgenre of literature, especially because it's like regular guy gets put in front of something that changes everything he believes about the fabric of the universe, right? But I do think it's more complicated than just what you think. It also interplays with like, with what you not just believe, but what you actually love and have passion for. And it seems like Othran doesn't have much passion for his god. He technically has a worldview. I think that's about it.
It kind of
It makes. On you go.
Oh no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, Nico, please.
I'm just gonna. No, you no.
I'll go. I'll go.
No, you hang up.
I was gonna say, preacher, what you were saying about it kind of reminds me of this idea that like there's a difference between intellectual understanding of something and experiential understanding of something. And worldviews can be formed by many different things, and when you're still trying to figure it out, oftentimes one pulls from what you've heard before or something, and one can tend to parrot that, like, oh, this is what I believe because XYZ. But or I saw someone experience this, or I experienced this by proxy or something. But it's when certain things happen that change your worldview, it usually comes from within, and it's that experiential understanding that I think like Othrun is still struggling with. Like he has that intellectual, maybe he has like a intellectually formed worldview, but that's why it doesn't align. It's like he hasn't necessarily experienced it here. So yeah.
And he's just awfully self-serving in a lot of it too. Yeah.
Right, which is, I would say probably, and again, we don't have like a holy text of this guy's religion, but like considering it seems to be pretty formed around like Judeo-Christianity, self-servingness is like one of the most baseline unbiblical things you can be, right? So it's like if you're driven to do pious things by one of the most ungodly motives, then like how pious is that thing? And we see that all throughout Scripture. And that's why, like, I brought up Isaiah 1. Oftentimes, the sin of Israel in the Old Testament is that they do the right things for the wrong reasons, and God cares about their heart, not about their outward actions.
Well, Atlantics also has like this almost like divine right of kings sort of mentality where they think that like the rulers are endowed by God. So I think that probably that's how he justifies his narcissism within the confines of his own religion, is that the God of life, love, and light just happened to love him a little bit more than everyone else.
Which is it's interesting. It's interesting you bring that up because in I don't want to say it's in 1 Samuel. Israel asks for kings, and God's like, no, that's a really stupid idea. And they're like, no, we really want kings. And he's like, y'all suck. If you get kings, it's going to go bad. And then this is the Dustin version. And then they do it anyway. And God gives them the kings to kind of show them, hey, you aren't fit to rule. It's going to go to your head and you're going to lose the plot. So interesting you bring that up.
No character, we're way far afield now, but no character in the Bible do I have greater sympathy for in some ways than Saul, King Saul, who is kind of the result of this selfishness. What I was going to say previously, Preacher, it makes sense to me that you would be a horror fan. I read this definition of horror. This was like 10 years ago. Horror is the sudden recognition that everything is fundamentally changed. And that idea of kind of things being earth-shattering. And I think you get that anywhere more firmly than you do in horror. Can I ask?
May have talked about that in a video yesterday.
Oh, yeah. Plug. How did you guys find Lacey? Did you enjoy the character of Lacey? Did you find her? I mean, I as I was reading her, I kind of wondered if some people would find her maybe a little bit flat, a little bit one note. The character that comes on stage and immediately kind of throws herself at the main character. Did you guys feel that there was kind of complexity there under the surface, or did you view her as a bit one note?
I found like. I think it's a little too early to say if she is one note or not, because we've only interacted with her, a couple of times. But I thought what was interesting about her is how she challenged Othrun's worldview. He mentions multiple times that she's wearing like warrior garb and she's a woman. And like you can, even though his thoughts are kind of like misogynistic, you can tell that he is at least respecting her position as a warrior, because he's there is some, I don't want to say fear, but there is some trepidation he has with dealing with her. He knows she's capable. He knows that she's highly capable, and that challenges his misogyny, even while he still kind of persists with that misogynistic mindset.
Yeah, my first thought was in the reality of the story, did she actually throw herself at him like that, or is that from his perspective, right? Like, does she really just think that he is just the man and
The
like
bee's
get,
knees.
get over here, boy, right? Like, because that's how he presents it, right? Like, she walks up to him and she's like, man, we could rule the world together, and like also you're kind of hot, right? But we know that this is coming from him, so that was my first thought, was like, I'm sure she is trying to play the political game and do these things. Did she play on his arrogance, right? Knowing that if she did that, then he would be like, oh, she's just into me, right? He just immediately forgets that like she could just be playing him politically, because he like you said, he was jealous of his brother for getting the first one. So maybe this time, he feels like it's his turn, and he's finally getting. Reminds me a lot of Severian, to be honest with you, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Uh-huh.
But Severian just is that much of like a chick magnet. Like, let's be honest here. That's why.
Guy's
That's
just
what's
a
going
stud,
on.
dude.
In his mind, he
Alpha.
is. Yeah. Yeah, no, I trust what Jenny Wirtz wrote in this comment, that I feel like there's much more going to be happening with this character, and I'm really intrigued where PL is going to go with this. Yeah.
She sort of alluded to, like, she's sort of next in line to rule the kingdom, basically, right? Because she's like the only, what is it? A female can only rule if they're a mage, and there's no male heirs. Isn't that am I right that that's the situation with is it Ina?
Yep.
So
think-
yeah, like, she's got to be important to some degree. What was interesting to me also was I don't know what to make of this, and maybe Preacher, maybe you're right that it's just sort of from Othrin's perspective, that's why it's presented this way. But so she shows up and, it seems very interested in him, and then she feels so rejected, right? When he sort of says no, but then she helps them get through the wilderness anyway, like using the fog and splits the ground and whatever. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. Because I could see maybe that's part of what you're referring to, David, with like the one note thing, that she's just like, no, I still love you. I'll help you no matter what, even if it's against my own people. But then it's almost like, did she lead them into a trap at the end there, sort of? Or is that unrelated? I'm not entirely sure what to make of all that. So yeah, I guess I don't have a very firmly formed opinion of her.
I feel like she has her own agenda, which she is very much looking after.
Mhm.
Probably, yeah.
I think it's crazy how quick Othrin was to be like, you said I was going to fall in love with Ina's daughter and I haven't yet, so I'm immortal. Like, he like very quickly is like, I outsmarted her, so I'm going to live forever. But it's like she could have just lied to your face. Like, why are you taking that for sure fact right now?
There's also other daughters, I think, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see. Maybe it's a sister or something. Speaking of falling in love, I really liked his wife in this, because I think
she's a sweetheart.
She is, and she's also like, she stands up for herself, which I respect.
Too good for him.
It seems know your worth, Queen. What are you doing? But it seems like in their culture, the women are sort of, second class and all these things, but she's like, she confronts him and she's like, hey, what are you doing with this other whoever? And so I thought that was cool. I respected her, and I'm interested in their dynamic going forward, especially if this Lycée gets more and more intertwined there, and seeing where that goes.
And I love how, like, in a lot of fantasy books, I feel like infidelity occurs and it's not really like talked about. And this, it's like being discussed before it's even happened. Like, she's like, so that's a little change of pace from what I usually find in my fantasy novels. And I liked that. I liked that she was like, who's that? Yeah. And calls him out to his face immediately. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it.
But we do know, though, that in this culture, because he has the, I'm blanking on the name, he has the friend who he makes some side comments about, whether or not his friend has a specific sexuality, and then he says, well, he could still marry a woman and then do his own thing, like in private. And so, like, it makes me almost wonder if this guy actually does love his wife, because it seems completely fine within this culture to have something on the side, or maybe that it's that, Lacey wants him for it to be like this king queen type situation. But I do genuinely find that he like seems to love his wife in an actual real way. I mean, he definitely speaks about her much better than Severian ever speaks about a woman. So, I mean, we're getting all these things we love about her. We are getting from his perspective. So, he seems to have something genuine towards her.
Agreed. Because I mean, Lacey even offers like, okay, like we could thruple it up, and he's like, no, me and my wife. So even going off of what you were saying, like with Uthlin, how you can kind of have the face that you present to your people, and then do something that maybe doesn't coincide with the religion behind closed doors. Even when he's offered that, he still says no. So I would agree that speaks to some affection he has for her.
Who's going to write the Othran meets Severian fan fiction?
Be big enough.
I mean, Alchemy's just got a $3 million movie deal, so maybe me. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go.
What? $3 million? It got a movie deal?
Yes, $3 million.
What? That's crazy. I love the cover of that book. I don't know if I'll read it, but really cool cover.
What did you guys think about the ending of this book? I think I've seen some people are a little on the fence about the point that was chosen to end here. So I'm curious how everybody kind of felt about. Did it feel abrupt? Did it feel? I don't know. I liked it.
I've heard that books 1 and 2 sort of form their own little duology. I'm not sure how true that is, but yeah. My understanding is that most people feel that way with book 1, and then by the end of book 2, they kind of see how it all fits together. But I don't know.
I felt like the plot point that got us to the end, where essentially one of the characters says, by the way, this was going to happen. You were going to get betrayed. I knew the whole time, but now I feel like I need to tell you. That felt very like rushed to me, or kind of like random. And again, I think that might be just how those more classical works tend to handle those plot points. Or it just felt like there was 3 talking heads in a room, and then at one point, one of the talking heads went, "Oh, hey, by the way, there was this whole plot over here, and now I'm going to tell you because I like you guys now." And so that's not technically the ending, but it is the thing that kind of brought about the ending, right? This twist on what everyone's trying to get out of it, and what we're going to do about this betrayal.
I'll just interrupt really quickly to say my toddler woke up from his nap early, so I'm going to need to bounce here. But thank you guys for having me. Zach, thanks for inviting me. PL, thank you for writing this book, sir. And you guys have a lovely rest of the chat, and I'll catch you on.
Bye, Sam.
All right.
You can invite your toddler to the body read.
That's right.
We've got 2 squares on the bottom that are kind of annoying me. So
he's got a spot.
Was that Senti guy who brought it up? By the way, there's this betrayal.
Yes. Yeah. The guy who initially was supposed to get them, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Him, and he spilled the beans. Yeah.
They're about to head somewhere. He's like, no, we shouldn't go there. And they're like, why? And he's like, cause this thing, and that's.
But wasn't I hear what you're saying, and that's a very valid criticism. I wonder if it's like at this point he had come to respect them enough that he's like, I actually can't follow through with this betrayal, like. And because we're not getting his POV at all, we don't know anything about it beforehand. Right. Which again, maybe I'm just coping, but
no, I think that's probably fair. Like, I think a more modern take on it, like, I think Othran would have walked into a room and overheard a conversation, and then the guy would have had to have been like, "Oh, no, I actually wasn't going to go through." Like that would have probably been the more modern way to do that, right? And then he finds out about this betrayal, But I keep using that idea of the talking heads. And maybe that is like a more classical way of doing the conversations. A lot of the second 2/3 of the book felt like the plot was moved forward by the talking heads being in a room and just getting somewhere through dialogue, right? And then something happened.
Sure.
I'm
When
looking
they
forward
got
to
it
book
out
two,
of,
though.
what'd you say?
I'd say I am looking forward to book two, though. I think it's, you know, and
Mhm.
Johnny just said in one of the comments that book two is where things get cemented. So I am curious to see how it's going to go.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the title of the books and I'm thinking, I think it's Pack of Wolves and something to do with lions. So I'm like, is this sort of like trifecta of kings? Is this going to be something that we explore throughout the entire series? Because we know that Othrin wants to form his like whole empire over this whole continent. So I wonder how much of it is going to be between him and the wolves and the lions.
Shall see. Isn't book 6 is something to do with the dragon on red, right? What he's teased at least. So prophetic dream, perhaps, or just a allusion to his standard that he came up with in this book.
I feel like any gripes I had with this first entry are going to be probably allayed in the second one, because it's like once you have your expectations of oh, this particular character, I'm not really supposed to gel with them, maybe even the majority of the time, but you can kind of say, okay, now I can approach this character with a different viewpoint, different lens. So I feel like I'm actually even more excited for the second book, because I'll be able to look at it again, like I mentioned before, basically without the preconceived notions going into it.
Yeah, I agree about that second book. And then, I feel like with any debut, there's going to be some kinks the author's working through. So I'm expecting his writing to be even better. Not that it wasn't great in the first book. Like, I think he has really good prose. But, some of the issues here and there, I'm expecting him to kind of clean those up before Last of the Atlanteans.
You mentioned prose. I did the audiobook, and I think that two things combined to cause me to struggle with some of those talking head moments. And that was the second voice in the audiobook was just not produced to the quality of the first one. And he was the deeper voice, but did the female character, which like totally threw me off for a second there. But also like when you're hearing mostly monologue from Othrin, he's not very poetic, but decently poetic, and that prose shines through. He's describing Atlantics, right? It is beautiful. And then I had to remind myself that he is now going to talk to someone that he kind of views as a heathen in a lot of ways, and probably doesn't have a lot of like good use of that language, and so they're going to talk super rigid, and it's not going to be pretty. And so a lot of those dialogue sections, it feels like the other characters, right? Like Hurt is just like, we go to place, right? And if you don't understand that has to be purposeful, or else it's not going to make sense with the story, it can feel like a really hard shift in pro style to go from that much monologue to then like essentially hearing these kind of heathens stumble and bumble through the language, right? In Othrin's view.
Was that the children going crazy in the background?
Yeah,
talking?
That nephew's fighting for his life.
Hopefully your house is still intact when you leave this. Yeah.
All right. Well, does anybody have any closing thoughts? Anything?
Looking forward to book 2 in what is it? November we're doing it, right?
Correct.
For people who say that Kavoth is obnoxious and self-centered and annoying, you're gonna meet somebody in this book who may give him a run for his money. That's all I'm saying. I think he makes Kavoth look like the schoolboy. So
the difference being that he's actually supposed to be, whereas Kavoth is supposed to be likable.
No, I don't. I disagree.
Sex god both. Yeah.
We'll find out in the Doors of Stone.
Yeah.
Have any of y'all read The Red Queen's War? That's actually who Othrin probably reminds me of the most at times, is Prince Jalin from these books. Jalin, yeah.
Yeah. He's not as funny as Jalin, but yeah.
Yeah. Jalin's a little bit more self-aware, but
yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, guys, thank you all for coming and chatting about this book. And it's been a blast. I loved getting all of y'all's perspectives.
Thanks for having
Thank
us,
you,
Steve.
guys.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Great seeing you all.
Is it